a paper with the journal. I then promptly recruited her to be an associate editor and put her to work. And so it's been really great to finally meet in person after many, many, many Zoom meetings. So I will get right to it. So I am trained as an anthropologist, but I spent the last about 11 years working at design college, working in an MFA program at the Art Center College of Design in Pasadena, and learned a huge amount, and want to really focus today on the ways in which the work I was able to witness by my students, and also the ways that it really changed my own practices as an anthropologist, and focusing on prototyping as something that I now do as part of my fieldwork in various ways. And my one super quick plea to anybody who does fieldwork is take pictures that aren't horribly ugly and then use them in your slides, right? So if you're, I mean, this is something I now do when I don't know what to do, is I just take pictures of colors and patterns and put them in my slides, because we all know anthropologists have the ugliest slides ever, and we should not. So, okay. Where's the keyboard? Next. So this, what's happening? Next, how do I go forward? Oh, there we go. Okay, we're good. Okay. Okay, good, great. So just if you want a copy of this presentation, just grab the QR code. I do have a bit more notes, and there's a bunch of links as well, because I'm going to talk fairly quickly through a number of projects that there's a lot more information on the student websites and etc. Everybody got it? Of course, I don't have my own notes visible here, but that's fine. So, couple of origin stories. So, one story again is that I have spent almost the last decade working in a design department, which is a very different kind of place for an anthropologist. But one of the things we were doing was traveling with our students to first Uganda and then Mexico City, and doing design work in the field. And a very important piece of this is that we were not helping anybody, right? It was very speculative, exploratory work that was not meant to be part of any kind of specific, helping effort. It was much more about learning about the space around you, exploring, and that kind of thing. But in the process of spending time in that department and really seeing how designers use technology, which is often to misuse it in very interesting ways, or try to make it do things it's not designed to do, right? Which makes it even more interesting, was it made me really realize the ways that anthropologists use technology, mostly the way it's supposed to be used, right? In a very straightforward way. And there are kind of patterns to this. So I'm going to be mean here about the discipline for a minute, which I do on a regular basis. There's the I was there photograph, which you can see really easily if you just do a Google image search, anthropology and technology. You're going to come up with a lot of these photographs on department websites, on individual people's websites. And here's a classic one, right? Andaman Islanders, right? I was there. So the height, or we might call the depth, of the colonial project of early anthropology. White man at the center, natives surrounding them, right? He's the subject of the image, et cetera, et cetera. Highly problematic. So again, I was there, right? Very common kind of image that you know, I would say I'm trying to get these people out of the waiting room. We want to avoid these kind of images in our, in the discipline if possible. So there's a tendency, as critical as anthropology is, unless you're a visual anthropologist and trained, there's a tendency to still not problematize technology and the ways that we use it in the field. And quite often, what's happening is that the technology is mediating between the anthropologist and the people that they're working with, again, in problematic ways. And I don't think I have that image in this presentation, but I have this awesome image of Napoleon Chagnon. If you know of him, he's a particular figure, worked with Amazon tribes and doing a lot of stuff on violence, but there he is, like in his Speedo bathing suit with a Yanomamo guy, and he's got like some contraption, and they're like pointing off into the distance, and he's like measuring something by being a scientist and looking at them. Again, these are the kinds of images that, again, are very problematic and da-da-da. So one of the areas, again, that I've done a lot of messing around is how can we be not just more critical in how we use technology, but more playful, and how is prototyping part of that. So the other kind of picture that we're starting to see now is I was there. Oh yeah, see, I was there doing fieldwork with technology. Oh, he's not in his Speedos. He's in his white colonialist outfit here. Love that photo. It's amazing. Again, similar kind of thing. So, part of my question is, as an anthropologist, what kind of work is this image doing in terms of what it communicates about the discipline and also the anthropologists' relationship to, right? Here, the anthropologists, right? I'm holding the technology and I'm aiming it at the natives. They're doing their native things. I'm documenting them. Or my favorite, now we're all just looking at the technology. I'm being mean, again, I'm being unfair, but these are the kind of images I would urge every field worker to think about before you post them online, right? So it's a little bit mean, but prototyping. So I was sort of spurred again by thinking about these images and what they project about a sort of unarticulated relationship between anthropologists and technology, and had been doing this field work with students in this master's program where, again, we would be in Uganda we kind of changed the schedule every time, but 6 weeks, 4 weeks, something like that. And our students would do these speculative, often technology-based kinds of projects. And I'll talk through them pretty quickly. And again, thank you. I can double. I can do it with my foot. Okay. So now, one thing to remember is these are not anthropology projects, if there are anthropologists here, right? These are design projects that were done in the field, but they did really inspire me to think differently about what my field work, could look like or could involve. But do not think of these as anthropology projects, because they're not, right? The other thing to remember is that these are projects, what we call projects. Usually they're like a 4-week project, which means that the student imagined, built, deployed, and documented the thing in 4 weeks or 6 weeks. So they're kind of like a term paper. They're not a finished project in the sense that what they don't do, which is, of course, I think often for anthropologists, the part we care about the most, they don't do the analysis and the reflection. They don't have time because another term showed up and they have another bunch of projects they have to do, and off they go. So just knowing that kind of framing. This project by Martin Bernard, we were in Mexico City for this, and this was an assignment where they were asked to make a map of the city that employed a theoretical point of view. One of the things I was really trying to get them to do was to use theory in their work. And I think he was being decolonial, anti-colonial. So this requires them to ask the question of themselves: what is a map? What does it do? Right? They were explicitly not just making using an existing kind of map form. This is what he called the chaos metronome. And so we had been collaborating with an artist from Chile who had created this circuit. And somebody online has their mic on. And so he had studied music. He also had a background. He came to us with a background in computer science and thus could build this contraption. There's a bunch of circuitry magic happening here because I don't know how to do those things. But basically, it would hear the sound and respond with this kind of movement based on what it was hearing. So he called it a chaos metronome because it did not, like a real metronome just has a set rhythm. This metronome was responsive to its environment. And so he would put it in different places around the city and create these little moments. Let's see, I would go to the link and see what we come up. So here's his whole website. And it's getting longer and longer ago that he did this. So again, part of what you see is this object going into different kinds of environments and neighborhoods and responding. Anyway, I'll let you, and he again documents some of the making. This was my favorite moment. This video. So we had gone to Chichen Itza as part of our thing, and he had set this up, and this woman wanders into the frame and starts flipping her hair around and like taking selfies. But there was something so perfect about it. Number one, the shape of this object and the way it looks with Chichen Itza, but then also this tourist wandering into the frame, which is the kind of thing that happens in field work that is in many ways not often part of the designer process. Just fantastic moment here that got to be part of that project. So as a way to, again, experience space differently or move through space differently, this was a really fantastic project, both for his own exploration, but again, I could imagine lots of ways, if I knew how to make something like that, that it could be cool to do in an more anthropological way. And he did say to me, he was like, I got 2 jobs off this project. He's like, you always told me it was the weird stuff that was going to get me jobs, and it was. Okay, now I got to go back to the presentation, which is on a tab where I can't quite see it. Oh, here it is. Okay. Okay, so that's Martin. There's more there. It's very well documented. This is audit. Same assignment, make a map. He also was using a decolonial lens. This was a different year, so we were going through the Templo Mayor in Mexico City, which is a very large temple that is now a museum. And his initial idea was, he's like, oh, I'm going to go around and I'm going to take samples. And then he was like, oh no, but that's really colonialist. It's like, yes. So what he did was he designed and he had a background in electrical engineering. he designed, this is the more finished version. So when we're talking about prototyping, we have the early version, which is here. This first version, he's got a camera. He has a light sensor on the bottom of the shoe. And so every time he takes a step, the camera takes a picture. So now he's making a map of what his ankle sees as he walks around the museum. And part of what's really important here is that this is a map that's only for him. It's not meant for just anybody. It's not a God's eye map that provides the information to any viewer who comes to it. Nope, just for him, right? So this question of what is a map, who is it for, what is the function, what does it do? He's asking those questions of himself as well as this goes. So first iteration, very quick and dirty, first prototype. Then, because part of what we always asked them to do was to explore the world around them, he went out, found a cobbler, also looked at cake, and had the shoemaker help him make this. So he did the electronics part, and then he loads it onto this boot. So again, part of the prototyping there is about, okay, I can make the basic object. Now I want to make it look better. I want to make it work better or do these other things. So eventually what he started doing was taking these longer walks around the city and making this series of maps, which are, again, they challenge some notions of maps because they're pretty incomprehensible as to the notion of what we think of a map is. But if you think about that, he's trying to use these ideas of decoloniality to rethink what could a map be. It's a very interesting exercise, right? And then, of course, this is what it looked like when he installed it in our temporary gallery in Mexico City. So he's trying to communicate something of this process of prototyping, and he's prototyping multiple things here, right? He's prototyping the object itself, but he's also prototyping what is one of these walks. Where am I going to go and why? What comes out of that? And then he also, you can't see it, but he printed them out almost like film strips and had them as almost physical objects. Again, as a physical object, maybe it's a map that looks like this very long strip of images, right? So again, it's an exercise. It's from the point of view of say, an anthropological journal, unfinished in many ways, awesome project. Led directly into his thesis work. Okay, so let's see, a couple others. So anything can be prototyped, right? Workshops are another thing that, again, I think both designers and anthropologists can really spend a lot of time with in good ways. So this actually isn't a workshop. This project, Judy was interested, we're back in Uganda now, interested in talking to middle-class women about land rights and land tenure. And in Uganda, women's rights are pretty tenuous. It's very easy for a woman, for instance, to have paid for the house to be built and then for her husband or partner to be a low-down dirty dog, kick her out, bring another woman in, and she has no way to secure her place. So women typically have a pile of money hidden somewhere and even another plot of land hidden somewhere. So in order to have these conversations, Judy had done some initial interviews, has learned about this, but she wanted to have these conversations with women in their kitchens, in this familiar place where they spend time. So she designed these implements, and this is an early prototype, these were real small, where she would sit down with the woman and she'd say, here, let me show you something. And she would pull out this spoon and she would undo it. And inside would be a land deed and a bunch of money. And the woman would see it and go like, blah, 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 and would talk for an hour, right? So the power of having demonstrated to what we often call our interlocutors in fieldwork that she understood their situation by translating it into a material thing was really effective in both making a kind of personal connection, but also in facilitating an interview kind of experience. And again, for me, like all kinds of light bulbs are going off. I'm like, designers design everything of the interview. They could design the chair, they could design the, right? And we tend to, it's like, oh, you just go in the room and you talk or whatever. So this was a really, really beautiful example of something that, I mean, these are made with, modeling clay or something. Not especially difficult to make, right? Not especially fancy, right? They're quick and dirty. That's part of what prototyping can do. And as she did more interviews, she refined this thing. It was purposefully still pretty rough because it was meant to be that way. But she worked again with a guy who made spoons in the market to make that hollow thing. And, and he's going like, I don't know why she wants me to make this weird thing, but she's paying me, so I'm going to do it. Okay, this project by Nidhi back in Mexico. Nidhi was really inspired by women in this rural area whose mostly their male relatives have migrated out. So the women are, this village is mostly women and daughters, and the men and sons have left and are in the United States. So she was interested in having them communicate about their migration, their experience of migration as the people who are left behind. So she didn't speak Spanish. So part of the real strength of the workshop that she developed was that it didn't require her to speak as much because the materials could get her through the activity. And also it didn't require literacy on the part of the participants, right? So she had them basically put their migration stories on a skirt, in part because she had been learning about the particular clothing traditions of the area where women's clothing from each village is immediately identifiable by the way it's woven and the way it's worn. And so the skirts that she used were inspired by that, but they were not of that same type. So again, I can't show you everything here. But she very carefully has designed a set of instructions and stencils for the women to use at certain points. And then again, as you go through her website, you can see people with the finished skirts that tell that story. And again, thinking about anthropological fieldwork, that kind of doing work that produces a thing that participants can then have can be a very important way of, again, honoring a relationship or having their participation give them something meaningful, right? Rather than a $10 gift card to Target or Taobao or wherever you're giving the gift card. So oh yeah, see, here's a picture of them. Okay. So anyway, you can get it quick. And the last one is Lauren Williams. I'll just talk you through this one. Again, I was, anthropologists, as you may know, we like to work slow, right? Like slow, 18 months in the field. Designers work fast. And at first I found that deeply frightening. But I do think there's a happy medium somewhere in there. I was really, really, really impressed with the amount of work that these students could get done in a month. It was kind of ridiculous. So this is Lauren Williams' work. She is now an assistant professor at the University of Michigan. We're extremely proud of her. She was she is an African American woman interested in Mexico, in the experience of Afro Mexicans and their experience with identity. So she designed a set of workshops that used the metaphor, I guess, or container of lucha libre, which is the Mexican, very dramatic Mexican wrestling tradition where there's a big story and there's the bad guy and the good guy and they're fighting and they have these masks on and it's kind of a big soap opera in a boxing ring. So everybody there is very familiar with this. So she would have them first you can see she's designed all of these materials for the workshop that take people through a process of asking questions, right? In your experience, defending your identity, what was a moment that was particularly definitive, right? So think about that. Okay, you've asked these questions. Now, on just a basic piece of paper, design your mask. So now there's prototyping happening inside this workshop, which itself has been prototyped. The participants first prototype the mask on a basic piece of paper. Then she had laser cut cardboard where they could construct a three-dimensional mask and add those elements to it and then wear it while they acted out the narrative of their own personal lucha libre, right? So who's your opponent? Capitalism, right? What's your signature move? I don't know, whatever, down with capitalism. Videotaped all of those and then also produced a 10-minute video of the whole process in 4 weeks. Which again, huge amount of work, beautifully done. Doesn't do the part, again, the analysis and stuff that an anthropologist would then go on to do to maybe say that's the thing. But again, this use of materials, the careful design of the materials that, right, they communicate visually. These are all design things that I really think could come in very handy for anthropologists. And of course, these are the finished versions. If we want to talk about prototypes, she's gone through several iterations of figuring out, is this the right way to do this? Okay. Okay, so now there's me. So this link, you go to tells the story of this ongoing project that I have called the Laboratory of Speculative Ethnology in much more depth. But the short version is, I'm a person, I'm not white, and I went to work at Art Center, which is really white. Really white. White people, white walls, white ideology, you name it, it's white. And it really freaked me out. I was like, what am I doing? So we were going to Uganda at that time, and I was coming back with these like duffel bags full of African fabrics because I love fabric. And so I was like, well, I'm going to start a lab. Like everybody starts labs. I'm going to start a lab. I'm going to call it the Lab of Speculative Ethnology. And, we need lab suits, and we're going to make them out of Dutch wax fabric, because we need our protective gear and we need color. Right? I'm bringing color. So it was kind of that at the beginning, and it has led to a number of prototypes and experiments. So this is sort of, gallery installation after the first summer of work. A lot of what I was playing with was obviously color, but each of the students who participated made their own lab suit. And they were excited to learn how to sew. One of them was like, look, it's 3-dimensional. I was like, yes, that's what happens when you sew a seam like this. But also I was doing a lot of, and you'll see more outcomes of this, doing a lot of playing around with spy cameras. and wearing them and seeing what you could do with them when they're not, when you're using them again in ways that they're not really meant to be used, whether it's sort of deploying them as a team of things that are being activated by light sensors, et cetera, or you can like talk to people through them, et cetera, et cetera. A lot of messing around at that point. So next iteration was this installation at the annual meetings of the American Anthropological Association in San Jose. So taking those same fabrics, renting a booth in the exhibition hall as opposed to delivering a paper in a thing, and then creating this space that was called Wakanda University. So we solicited programming from other people. We've got, again, we have the suits, we have the salon chair. I was doing a thing for a while called like method massage. Like, are your methods old and flaky? Have a method massage and, we can work it out. And part of what, in this prototype or iteration, now we're in live space. We're in the anthropology, that main hall, which I typically myself find to be a very alienating, unpleasant space. And it was very live. And part of what was interesting was that people were finding this space and coming to it, right? And saying, oh my God, thank you so much. Right? Like, we also had VR programming of various, indigenous made VR short pieces, and people could try that. And yeah, that was really productive, I think, in terms of learning for myself about what are the potentials of doing this more playful, speculative work. Here's here's somebody with a glass, having a good time. Nick Kawa there. And even here, right, you can see this woman who, this was actually her actual clothes, but you don't often see people in this kind of looking this happy at the AAA. So the physicalness of the space and the things that were happening in it actually created different kinds of interactions than normally take place in that place. I'll go quickly again. Another installation, similar, different situations. So again, I think of that as a prototype. This space was much larger. This was when the meetings were in Vancouver. So we were able to do some things that we had people send in old broken technology and then prototype things for themselves. And we had this idea that we would sort of make a museum out of them. So again, somebody made glasses to block transphobic bullshit. This is, she's a yoni corn. So here's the yoni corn thing going on here, right? And again, for anthropologists, particularly at the meetings, to be playful is highly unusual. But also to be in a space that has color and is asking them to bring their bodies in. And a lot of what I learned from design, right, is you have to do that, all of that very purposefully. You can't just, we have all these pictures of students in their first term because we send them out into the world, and they've gone to a public park and they're like, do my cool thing, and they've got pictures of themselves like sitting there because nobody is doing the cool thing, because they haven't yet figured out how in public to make that invitation in a material way so that people will respond, do what they want them to do. It turns out that's really complicated and takes a lot of thought about how to, we were at an exhibition yesterday where there's a video projecting and there's this beautiful fabric and the video's projecting on the fabric. But the coolest part is there are these little fans, little hand fans on the wall, and it says, take one of these and place it close to the fabric, right? Without that explanation, you wouldn't do it, right? But you take it and it's like, whoa, something really cool happens when you do that. And all of a sudden that whole experience has changed. So you should go do it. And I won't tell you too much about it. But this was in a space with other installations as well. So people are already coming into that space, which was a large kind of black box, knowing that this is not the AAA space, right? So it's different than that other Wakanda University space in some ways. And there was more liquor in here too. So that was helpful. So again, I'm in a long-term collaboration with a man named Ben Caldwell in Los Angeles, and you'll see a little bit more of that in a second. But this installation here this is in Crenshaw Plaza down in Leimert Park. And part of what's happening there is the Olympics are encroaching. And this is a historically Black neighborhood that is now rapidly gentrifying. Ben has been there for 40 years and has been very crucial kind of community touch point, artist, organizer, et cetera, et cetera. So Crenshaw Plaza has a lot of empty retail inside of it. And he has a close relationship with another bunch of people who are in the process of developing what they imagine to be the Leimert Park version of Tyler Perry's production facilities in Atlanta, which is to say film, video, production. They've already got $23 million of funding. So what they do is during the week of the African American Film Festival, which happens there every year, they occupy space in Crenshaw Plaza to try to communicate with the community about this development that they're doing and what that's going to mean for Leimert Park and for the people of Leimert Park, jobs, et cetera, et cetera. So as part of that, Ben Caldwell has us come in and, again, sort of iterate and design space that invites people to come in and participate. This is just a piece of a workshop that I've been working on that I can't make work the way I want it to, but I'm obsessed with the little, you can buy these little modules, the talking greeting cards. So you can buy the little module and you can record and then hear it really fast. So I have this idea that people could do something that involves those, and I have not really figured that out to my satisfaction. Okay. So one of the key things that is really important with prototyping, making things for people is, who's it for? Which was I was known in the studio for that, because my classic line was, a student would have something and they'd say, who's it for? And they'd be like, well, people. And I'm like, yeah, which people? And they would say, and I would always end up at the point of, well, it's not for poor Black people, so tell me who it's for. And usually they're designing for upper middle class urban professionals who earn at least $250,000 a year. They just aren't going to say that, right? Usually that's who my students are designing for as a kind of default. So what does it look like when you're designing, again, in an ethnographic sense, for a very specific purpose, group of people, et cetera? This is, again, loosely under the umbrella of the Laboratory of Speculative Ethnology. And literally, this is how it came up. This was shortly after George Floyd, #1. But I was literally walking around the studio, like I was like going like this. And then I was like, ooh, what if I had a camera in my hand? And then I was like, oh, what if the technology, right, the camera is meant to protect the Black man and not to surveil him. What happens then? What does it look like? How does it work? So this is the first prototype of what I call the hands up, don't shoot camera, right? And so in the next one, I'll show you more. So this one is on a little stretchy glove, and this is actually in front of Chaos Network, where Ben works. This was some other early stuff. This is part of my Afro GoPro series, which is, why should white guys have all the fun? Let's bring some color up into this experience. But this guy was trying on the glove, and he couldn't get his hand in, and he was like, if the glove don't fit, right? So it's referring back to the O.J. Simpson trial. So already the interaction that I'm having with this guy is speaking to his experience, right? And he's, that was sort of about it. It wasn't, but again, it's not the kind of interaction you would normally have in anthropological fieldwork. The next version of it, I built it out a bit more. Oh, so the way it works, there's a camera, there's a Raspberry Pi, there's an accelerometer, and it's trained so that when you go like this, it starts taking pictures and sending them to the web, right? You can do that, right? So the more finished version, second prototype, a lot of my work has to do with Afro diasporic dance and religion. So part of what I'm doing here is really playing with that idea, but being serious that this is both a technological object and a spiritual object of protection. So the beading here refers both to Cuban Santeria and Haitian Vodou. So there's a divination thing where you use 16 calories to answer questions, sort of like the moon things for Matsu that you do there. This thing here is reference to Shango, who is the owner of lightning. He's also a king and the dispenser of justice, right? This double-headed axe. So you certainly want justice on your side when you're a Black man who's being stopped by the police, right? This red and silver here is for Ogu, who is the blacksmith. And he is the owner of everything metal: cars, bullets, guns, telephone wires, railroad lines, right? So part of what I'm doing here is being very purposeful in saying there's no contradiction between these religions and contemporary technology, because not only do contemporary Black men live this, but contemporary Black people who practice these religions live this, right? So, and there are so many voodoo ceremonies on YouTube, I can't even believe it. Like, I was looking the other day, I was like, these guys are they have their phone number. They're like, call me. It's hilarious. They used to not like that, but they're all about it. So super quickly, because I want to wrap up a little bit, another big piece. So what we've been doing, this is Chaos Network. It's in a corner building in Leimert Park. What we've been doing now for almost 5 years is we sit out on the corner here and people go by and we say, hey, do you want to make a robot? And they go, what? And we show them how to make a robot in 15 minutes. Real simple, toothbrush, little bit of tape, little this and that. But even again, that activity is something we have now prototyped across 5 years. So we have it so that we can do it one-on-one in 15 minutes. I could, if I had all this stuff with me, which I don't, I could do it by myself with the whole group. We have a different way of preparing it for that, right? So we've been doing this so long that we have it pretty much set up for us to handle all kinds of different situations. So it's its own thing, but the other thing it is an entry into this much larger thing that is Ben's brainchild. Oh, like here's just a quick little, whoop. you know, and we do it with kids, we do it with not kids. That's my collaborator, Casey. So once you make the robot, then you could like 3D pen with it. This was during the period that we were turning everything into like little miniature parade floats. You know, we've done it with people who were like nodding out because they're on heroin. We've done it with the pastor. We've done it with the, right? So us just being on that corner has been really crucial, partly because this is a neighborhood where they're used to a lot of people coming in and then run and going away again and not investing. So actually, it took 2 years for the guys around the corner to acknowledge that Casey existed and say, yo, man, what's your name? 2 years. Right? So there's a way in which our regularity of showing up every week over years has allowed us, we're not in, no, but we're not all the way out. and people acknowledge our ability to be, at first, when we started going, they would get in our faces. Like, what are you doing here? But Ben is very crucial for creating that. That's his corner. And anybody on that corner has Ben's permission. And so, you know, but this is where anthropology and saying, no, we're going to take the time, right, has been very crucial. Because the next or different piece of this is Ben's, well, not that. Sankofa City, this is Ben's, you know, ultimate brainchild, which is an Afro-future by Lamert Park for Lamert Park, right? So my former colleague, Sean Donahue, likes to say, you know, for designers, the future is blue, and it has a lot of screens, and it has a lot of hands pointing at screens, right? And, you know, again, you can see these images over and over and over again. That's not the future of Lamert Park, right? It's not a future they want any part of. It's not a future they recognize, and it's not a future that speaks to them. So part of this future is autonomous cars that look like this, that would go around the neighborhood, and he has a $25 million grant to make this happen, right? He is determined, and he wants those cars to be designed by those kids who started in the robot workshops, right? So this is an imagining of what that might look like. And then this is an installation that we just did in the LA Public Library as part of Pacific Standard Time, where we now have a much more, as Ben would call it, dreamed out version of the autonomous car, where I had to teach myself how to do automotive upholstery. So I did the seats, and then the car has been, this isn't actually an electric car, it's just on a what do you call it? A golf cart chassis. But in terms of the size and the bulk and the kinds of stuff. But again, part of what's very important is it doesn't look like a generic future car, right? They want things to look African, African American, and to reference their culture, their sensibility. There's also like a phone booth where you can call the future, right? and people talk to you. Okay, so that's that stuff. Very quickly, the stuff I'm here to do. This is my, let's see, where's my grandma? That's my grandma. And this is my family. So on the Chinese side, US born, she was born in the US, she was born in the US, and her mother was born in the US, which means that I'm descended from the very earliest Chinese immigrants to the US, which is why I don't speak Chinese. And my daughter looks so much like my aunt, it's crazy. Okay, so I didn't bring them, but I have chi pao that belong to them. And that's part of what brought me to Taipei. This is one of them, which is now cut into little pieces to be part of a quilt, but that's a different long story. So what I've been doing as part of this bigger project that I can tell you more about that has to do with heritage and migration and fabrics and everything, focusing in Taiwan on Qipao tailors. The traditional tailors, here's Master Lin, have been men, and all of their apprentices now are women because men can't make a living doing this anymore in Taiwan. I think in Hong Kong it's better, but all the apprentices are women, and they're usually upper middle class women. Part of what's happening is the tradition is being handed from men to women, but it's also that they have to modernize in certain ways. Like they have to have websites. That would be a basic one. Like he can't use his smartphone. He just hands it to her and is like, do those things for me. You know? So, but there are also tools that they have used traditionally that aren't made anymore. And there's not a big call for them because there aren't very many tailors. Right? So no factory is going to make them because they would want an order for 10,000. So what we just finished doing was prototyping and making sort of reproduction tools for some specific activities. So here you can see this is the binding that is often put on Qipao traditional clothes. This is actually not traditional clothes. They also make clothes for the local Matsu shaman. So these are shaman clothes. But this fabric here needs to be, this is one of my family Qipao. This fabric here has to be stiffened with wheat paste before it's cut and applied. And so this is the tool. This is a very old one that has been broken and been repaired a number of times, and the masters hoard them, as do their apprentices, who he gives them like to the apprentices he likes. So this is the paste, and you spread it with this tool. Here's some examples of the kinds of ones that you can buy now that don't do the job. They're either this weird single piece that's like clunky and heavy and ugly, and these are poorly made, and they also don't do the job very well either. So again, through the beauty of field work, this woman is very interesting. So she apprenticed with Master Lin, but instead of opening up a tailor shop, what she has done is opened a business where she teaches classes to upper middle class women and has developed a whole curriculum where you can take her 8-week class and make your own qipao. So she's created shortcuts, she's made things easier. You know, she's done a lot of work to make this something that an inexperienced person could do in 8 weeks and have it look pretty good. And this is her tool that was given to her by the master. Here's a bamboo one, a plastic one, a blah, blah. So Vivian has taken Jessica's classes and went to high school with Kobo. And they both went to design high school, and she's like, he's the perfect guy to do this. So he actually has made the new version, and it was, let me see if this video of them, so you can see her putting down the paste and everything. So you put this paste down, and it's used in a lot of, the paste is used in a lot of ways, but, oh yeah, there she goes. So this is the main thing, like that binding, you have to put the paste on. And there are a lot of rules about the right way to do it, which I am going to spend the next few weeks learning. Like you're not allowed to get the glue on the, you know, yeah, over there, etc. But part of what having the prototyping done was amazing was because she's explained to him how she wants the tool to be. And he's asking all these questions because he knows the materials and how they work. The blade is made of stainless steel, so it's a little bit flexible. And at some point, she's talking about how that haptic feedback, where she can feel the fabric as she's laying down the starch, is really important to her. But part of the problem is the way that tool is made is it breaks right here. So he's thinking about how do I fix that, right? So that that's not a problem. So she's showing him how she uses it. And that whole conversation was super exciting to somebody like me. So now he has actually prototyped. That was the prototype. She tried it out. It's approved. Here's the picture he drew out. And then they also decided, see, it's 168. So it's 1 centimeter wide. This is 6 centimeters and that's 8 centimeters. And like that's, and they're like, well, that's a good number. So we're going to like stick with that. We're going to not make this longer, et cetera, et cetera. So here's the, do I have a picture of, I might not have, this is like where I would, oops, oh, let me find, that's a different thing. We have the current prototype. Believe me, it exists. But one of the things that he did was to make that join bigger so that it won't break in the future. So now, like, they're all really excited because their students have put in their orders and I put in my order. Again, part of what I think is really exciting about thinking of this as field work is that number one, from a fieldwork point of view, it allowed me to learn more about how to use that tool than I could have learned in another way. But it also, again, does this thing where she's really excited about the tool, right? Because now she can, the one she has from the master, she actually said, I don't use it anymore because it's too precious. My student broke it and I can't let that happen again. So she's happy now that she has a tool that she's going to be able to use. That's what she wants. And he's happy because he just got a whole bunch of work. So for me, this is the kind of thing that I'm always looking for when I'm doing field work is how can I come up with an interaction or an activity or something that I'm doing that provides that kind of benefit to the people that I'm spending time with. That again isn't a $10 gift card. So to me, it has all kinds of, and there's other tools which they don't use a centimeter or a inch. They use an old Chinese measurement that I have written down somewhere in a notebook. Which you can get plastic rulers in that measurement here. Hong Kong is the last place that you can get those, but you can't get the bamboo ones, which are the best and the most. So we're going to try to figure out how to prototype those. We might have to get new rulers and kind of scrub them down and do that. But that's kind of, again, this is a way of, I think, it's what I call the sweet spot between design and anthropology, where I've been taking things that I learned from design and using them in my own ethnographic work. So thank you. Okay. And that's from my bad photogrammetry project, but that's for another day.
Yeah, it sounds intriguing too. All right. Thank you, everyone. Oh, now let me open up the floor for questions, both online and offline. So for the online audience, could you just type your questions in the chat box, or you can raise your hands, and I can once I see that I can call your name. But for the offline audience, you can just raise up your hand. Yes, please.
Makes sense of, yeah. I have a question, but I guess the most reasonable way to make sense of my question is by going back to this idea of the anti-colonial approach in relation to the positionality of the designer and how this positionality can contribute sometimes to soften the boundaries between subject and object positions, but also in some other cases, it can produce new boundaries. So, for example, designer maker, who's the mind giving the ideas, and then who's the manual labor, or researcher and practitioner, or in the case of workshop, facilitator and participant. So this like power relations are interesting to me. But most importantly, the tension between the what is representational and what is performative. For example, you have mentioned in your presentation, take pictures, use the pictures, and the way you are deploying these ideas through the slides. I mean, the pictures perform the narrative tone of your ideas, and they also sort of create the aesthetics of it. So, in that sense, my question is, how does this performativity involved in the act of making or prototyping can contribute new ways of understanding fieldwork? Can you still call it fieldwork, or is it that you are prototyping the field? And my question comes from a very ignorant perspective. I mean, I'm not no anthropologist. I'm a designer, and I use prototyping as a research method. So I'm interested in how you frame this idea of the field.
I guess the stereotypical joke of somebody, your advisor gives you a notebook and a pencil and says, "See you in 2 years." That's field work, and then you go off and you like hang out in the jungle and you come back and you tell your stories. So I mean, it's more complicated than that, but there's also, I didn't focus on that here as much, but there's it's still very language centric in the sense that you write your field notes in language, and that's what field notes are. And again, in other stuff, I've been really experimenting with, like the master was cleaning his studio and got rid of all the scraps. And so I've been practicing how to do sewing. And I'm like, well, those are field notes. And, here they are. So there's a piece of questioning what is a field note, which is a huge thing that anthropologists think about. But also, I think, again, this tendency to romanticize what it means to be in the field with people, which often doesn't ask enough questions about how fraught those relationships can be, or power, representation, et cetera, et cetera. But there is, I think, from the design perspective, what was so challenging for my students was not being in the studio and doing the work. And so doing the work in, a village center, or, in these places where typically, or very often, the designer will have an experience, but then go back to the studio to process anthropologists to trouble, or again rethink a lot of these assumptions about, there's discussions about like, what does it mean to do, digital ethnography? Like, okay. But I think there's real ways to think about how do we engage in the field and what does that look like? And particularly because designers also have such a strong capacity to intervene. And of course, sometimes it can go terribly wrong, but an interview is no less of an intervention. So we got to stop pretending. And I think embrace it in these ways where being more bold with it can actually be much more exciting and much more productive. Doesn't totally answer the question, but I think it's like such a interesting area for thinking and doing.
Right. Thank you. Yeah, I guess I just asked this question because you mentioned about the relationship between design and anthropology. It can be very fruitful, of course.
Yes.
But like in my past experiences with some people during my PhD, I found the relation to be very toxic also.
Oh,
like,
yes.
you are prototyping, but no, you are actually doing participant observation. And I was like, no, it's not that I'm like arriving in a field that is waiting for me.
Right.
I'm kind of making it myself.
Yeah. We can, let's have drinks.
Thank you.
There is a reason I quit working at Art Center in August. But I learned so much. So I try to really appreciate what I learned, but there's a lot of, but again, I like the potential. But because like what they call design anthropology is a nightmare on the whole. It's like the worst of both. Let's not go there.
Thank you. Another question from School of Design. So I think especially you mentioned different ways that anthropology can entangle with design in the field in different ways and open up different potentials. I'm particularly interested in when you were talking about a prototype or the making of artifacts. And that reminds, of course, us a lot of the practices in design, which is we call speculative design. But what we see, for example, when it comes to speculative design, particularly in the technology space, is when the prototyping process and all that, I think it's very valuable also for anthropologists. But when it lands into something nice, something good looking, something functionally workable, it seems to kind of, the criticality leaves the artifact. And people just starts to talking about the artifact as a potential for technology improvement rather than talking about all the insights that has been generated in the process. So I wonder whether you have any insights or potentials that you observe where anthropology can help to talk about the artifacts into different ways, to bring it to a different audience and to bring out the criticality.
Yeah. For me, that criticality is crucial, and it was one of the things I didn't struggle with it with my colleagues in the program, but I very much struggled with it at the institution as a whole. I'll leave it at that. One of the things I think, design, particularly as it happened in the US and the way that it was very always deeply tied to industry, means that capitalism is not a question. So already the most important questions can't be asked, right? So when you have an undergrad, for instance, who in a very well-meaning effort to address the homeless problem in Los Angeles is designing a car that's meant to be lived in, and nobody who's teaching him is asking him the questions that need to be asked, right? You have a problem. So for me, it's a lot of it's about changing design education, frankly. One of the things that I found very difficult, we had students who would come in who'd had design undergrad, and we had students who come in who had liberal arts undergrad. The liberal arts undergrads often had pretty basic design skills and really needed to like learn a lot quickly. But the designers who had only had design undergrad, for whatever reason, and I think a lot of the times it was because they understood, they felt they were very unconfident readers and writers. And so then they would be like, I'm not going to read that because has too many big words. And, you know, I think a lot of it was actually insecurity and fear. So they could do pretty work, but it like had no content. And I can't teach you 4 years of critical thinking in one semester. I just can't. I can do my best, right? So there's this tension. There was always this kind of constant tension between, and you know, you always want to go to your strengths, right? So it was very hard to sort of reel design students back to almost do worse work that had better thinking. I think the other piece of it is that piece of design that's about solving problems, right? Because again, I'm oversimplifying, but typically design solves problems, and I'm not talking about the more speculative kinds of practices, but you know, typically it solves problems by designing an object that's made to be mass produced. So again, there's a number of questions that we cannot ask that are in fact the crucial questions. Does this object need to exist? Because it's caught up in a whole series of other assumptions that actually need to be undone. Again, if you design for poor people, you're not going to make a lot of money. So nobody designs for poor people, right? You know, things, even just basic things like personas are just like toxic garbage, right? Oh, let me substitute my own stereotypes about those people and design for them instead of going on the corner for 3 years and finding out who they are. Of course, you don't have 3 years as an undergrad, right? But the problem was because of the stuff that needed to be undone, I was never going to let a student anywhere near that work, because that would have ruined my credibility with the community that I've built up for 5 years. Right? So there's a real tension. This is sometimes where time, it can be, because that time that it does take to build up relationships ethnographically can be undone very quickly. And so often, you know, I have had a couple students that I let in, but I could never integrate that into a class. It would be a disaster. But finding ways to give students a little bit of hands-on experience that kind of forces them to confront the ways in which their education doesn't equip them for certain kinds of problems that can't be solved by a product or a poster is very challenging, partly because of the faculty have to develop relationships and projects, but then of course we're not being paid for that. And they're not supporting it with money, right? And so then it really becomes like, why I'm not giving them my ethnographic wealth so that they can exploit it, because I'm mad at them about some other things right now. But I think there's a lot of very interesting like you sound really interesting. There's a lot of very interesting designer work happening, particularly, you know, Brazil, you know, Chile, even in the US and Europe, where there's a guy named Frederick Van Amstel who just went to Florida, you know, really asking these questions and asking, how do we be more, not just socially responsible in a generic way, but more fully anti-colonialist, more critical, more complicated. Yeah. Yeah.
So the question says, Dr. Chin, thank you for the amazing sharing. It seems like all your projects started from a clear idea that you will make a material objects or performance. But social science research is often text-based. And is it possible to transfer already text-based research findings to other visible or touchable material objects or forms? Or do we must make prototype as early as possible, like at the very initial ideation stage?
Yeah. I mean, I would say yes. Language is very powerful. We know that. So I'm not against it. I think it's great. I love it. I love writing. My dad's a writer. Everybody's a writer. I joke in my family, you don't really grow up until you have your first book on the shelf. So I would say that I think that, that expanding the toolkit is what I'm talking about. But language is a lot. But I would say that, and I think it's in the notes, a paper draft is in a sense a prototype. So we just don't think of it that way. We could. But there is a kind of a benefit that comes from explicitly saying, I'm prototyping, right? So at that level, many things can be prototyped, and I ran through it very quickly, whether it's objects, whether it's a workshop, which is really a set series of interactions and activities, whether it's an interview, etc. But I think one of the takeaways I hope that you have is that material things communicate differently than language things. And it's cool to be able to make use of that, right? I didn't use this example, but in Uganda, when the women among our students were having a lot of trouble if they went out in public, especially as a group, they're getting hands on their bodies that they're not welcoming. And so one of them was like, I wish I had a skirt that was like covered in barbed wire. And my colleague's like, well, go to the market and have somebody make that for you. Like, you can do that. You're a designer. So she goes down to the market, finds a seamstress, gets her to put barbed wire around this skirt. And then she comes back with a bra that also had like nails in it that come out like this. And I was actually hanging around with dancers from the university, and a bunch of them were coming to my apartment for a birthday thing. And I said to the student, Barb, why don't you come over and bring that thing? Because they're sort of your age, and, you can get some sense of what they think of it. And literally what happens is she has it in a box. She picks up the skirt, and 45 minutes later, they're still talking. That's a lot better than an interview prompt to me. Right? The men are like, and they're also performers, so they're being like, the men are like, who wants to dance with somebody like this? And the girls are like, I would buy that right now. So it just sparked this thing in such an exciting way. It was awesome.
If nobody is asked questions, I'm going to take the advantage and ask questions of my own. It is really, thank you. This is really thought-provoking, because I'm thinking the prototyping and making material objects in some sense break the boundary between the field work and like writing up processes, and also like the research output, right? It's like in the process, it's like involving this kind of a continuous kind of engagements that does not have a start, does not have an end, because you can just keep doing it, right, for this one project. So I'm just wondering, how, because you mentioned the field work, right? And its relationship with prototyping. But I'm also thinking, do you think this is also a type of research in itself? And yeah, that's my question. And I have another question. Sorry. The other question is about that you mentioned that designer usually do things much faster, because we have a few designers here. Because anthropologists, we kind of take 10 years to produce something. Yeah. So I'm just wondering, because you write, but also you design stuff. So in terms of the okay, but so in your experience, why the differences in pace, and how do you adjust this kind of different anticipations and in rhythms of producing things?
Well, and the answers kind of go together because there is also I think design research, right? And so in a way, with the prototyping, some of the research is about the materials, about how is this knife made? What is it made of? Why does it work like this? They're in a way very technical questions. I wasn't the expert there. It was Kobo, the jewelry guy who usually likes to make very detailed rings that look like cats. His work's really awesome. But so he understands, it's research at a bunch of levels, right? So that now I can understand why the old tool was a problem, because he knows so much about what it's made of, but he also knows how to maybe change the tool so that it won't break and be more useful in the future. But I think another thing that I learned from working at the design school was thinking of smaller projects that can be part of a body of work, as opposed to, we tend to think of field work as this massive undifferentiated thing that then results in a stack of paper this high that's full of all these, and then you have to dig through it and somehow magically interact with it and come out with a dissertation and a book. And there's something really satisfying, like just prototyping that tool. That's a little mini project of this larger field work that I can just chunk off as a thing. And I learned that from working with designers, right? And so that's pretty cool. It's also very satisfying because I don't know about anybody else, but I am constantly full of anxiety when I'm doing field work, because it's like, oh, I didn't do anything today. I'm what's happening? Nothing. But ooh, we got the knife made. Yes. If I stopped here, it wouldn't be a failure. So it gives me some some pep in my step, or also just confidence that I have something and it's very concrete. But ethnographically, right, by hanging around in the studio more and watching other students and watching how Jessica teaches them and blah, 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 I will get more. And I don't even know exactly what it is, because that's how it is with ethnography. But I know it's going to be, I know there's more to come if I stick with it. But so again, I feel like those kind of clear deliverables that a design can give you, they're really useful. And again, useful in a lot of ways. And some things can be done quickly, because that happened actually fairly quickly. And he's going to deliver them next week. And I only got here in the middle of, not here, but in Taipei in the middle of January. That's for ethnography, that's ridiculously fast. And for design, it's probably kind of slow. So again, it's moving between those ways of thinking about things is useful, I think, as especially with the pressure to publish all the time. And then we're thinking about that least publishable unit of thinking that we can do. And then what was your other question?
Oh, I think you answered.
Okay. I sort of answered.
One more question. I was saying this last question. Yeah.
Thank you. I suppose, again, I'm a designer, not an anthropologist, but I mean, my understanding of anthropology is sort of as this external observer trying to document some phenomenon in society. And I think, it goes really well with all those old photos of the white guys and the cameras, and, the technology captures the experience. But what I find really refreshing is the shift in the anthropologist or the ethnographer to become a co-producer, because in prototyping, they are very much part of that process. And so kind of there's a new thing that emerges that is not the anthropologist, and it's not necessarily the person that's being observed, but it's something quite new. Are you exploring that in the work that you do? And sort of, I suppose it's the shift away from this almost objective idea of social science into one where actually it's this co-productive space.
I guess some of my backstory is, I gave up that objectivity a long time ago. So my book, I gave my more, that's an autoethnography of my consumer life. So I've done a lot of, I'm not invested in objectivity. I'm more invested in, questions about how do we do this work ethically, thinking about power, thinking about inequality, thinking about people's rights to have their stories go into the world in ways that they would want, right? And or also thinking about, I think one of the things that ethnographers really have to contend with is like, they don't care. We don't matter that much sometimes. And, it matters to us, and that's fine. We can take that into our world, and it's like, but I like the co-production, I think, is very much also the, collaboration. And so with Ben, for instance, and the whole he's really running the show, and we are his helpers. And he's a master at getting people like us who have resources like to serve his ends. And we are perfectly happy to do that. And that's an ethical stance, as well as as one that makes sense for that work. And something that I think, again, for design is a great thing to think about and engage with, whether it's in the small interaction of prototyping or a larger kind of community-based project. But that yes, you nailed it.
Okay, so thank you everyone for coming, and this is a really conversational, turns out to be really, really interesting and conversational. Thank you so much. And we'll just end today's talk. And in case you want to talk with Dr. Chen, we probably have some more time in this room, so you can just feel free to chat a bit more. So otherwise, thank you so much. Thanks again for joining us. Thank you. And also the online audience, thank you. Okay.